Sometimes it's difficult to imagine another actor playing an iconic role, like it's impossible to imagine anyone else playing Iron Man now that Robert Downey Jr. has had his hands all over the suit, or someone else trying to emulate my terrible brand of comedy. Who am I kidding? We're all expendable here. Anyway, that scenario doesn't always happen, and it actually can take studios another trip round the circuit to find their stars. And yet, that's not what we're going to be talking about today, because the entries on this list followed the rule of 3 and only nailed their casting choices the third time around. As we know, third time's the charm and all that, so let me try and charm you with all of these luscious vocals. As I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 movie characters who were perfectly cast the third time. Number 10. Two-Face, Aaron Eckhart. The Dark Knight. It's a shame that we'll never get to see Billy D. Williams take on the full role of Two-Face as was originally planned, with him starring as Harvey in the 1989 Batman, but apparently it wasn't enough to make a, pun incoming, dent to get the second go around. However, Two-Face would get his second face in the oddity that was Joel Schumacher's 1995 Batman Forever, this time played by Tommy Lee Jones. Now, Jones certainly brought the requisite madness to the role, though the material did kind of make him almost exactly like the Joker in places. Still, at least he had fun, right? However, it wasn't until Harvey Dent was reintroduced in Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight through Aaron Eckhart that fans were given a proper taste of the character. Getting to see Gotham's White Knight go rogue was a fascinating arc, all of which was made better by Eckhart's charm and good looks. Somehow we managed to get a grounded character and a Saturday morning cartoon villain through this role, and that takes some real direction and acting chops to pull off successfully. And yes, before you say anything, I could have easily given this entry to Heath Ledger for his Joker turn, but I really feel that Eckhart gets overlooked in this department, so let's give it up for Two-Face. Number 9. Rooster Cogburn, Jeff Bridges, True Grit. Rooster Cogburn is the aging US Marshal at the center of Charles Portis's 1968 novel True Grit, as was played by John Wayne in the 1969 original adaptation. Cogburn is arguably Wayne's signature role, being that was the one that finally netted him a Best Actor Oscar, and he even reprised his role for the sequel, before it was then passed on to Warren Oates in the 1978 TV movie True Grit, A Further Adventure. So how do you follow up John Wayne and an Oscar? Well, by getting Jeff Bridges in, of course. This 2010 Coen Brothers remake was somehow even more faithful to the book, and as a result, an even closer interpretation of the character. The part, admittedly, wasn't too much of a stretch for the grizzled vet, but he ended up scoring a Best Actor nomination for his fantastic work, which remains one of his most memorable performances to date. Number 8. The Hulk, Mark Ruffalo, The Avengers. The Hulk sure does feel like he's been shafted in his movie life a bit, doesn't it? With Eric Bana playing the not-so-jolly Green Giant in Ang Lee's 2003 film, and Edward Norton taking up the Purple Pants in 2008. Now, while both actors brought something different to the role, the films themselves didn't leave audiences gassed. In fact, one could argue that because so much time was spent on trying to nail the character, not enough time was spent on the actual plots themselves. What it needed was a good bit of direction, and wisely Joss Whedon reintroduced the Hulk through The Avengers, and with that, the face of Mark Ruffalo. Given Whedon's massive lore for and knowledge of the character, it's little surprise that he wrote by far the most compelling and entertaining screen version of the Hulk to date. Ruffalo was perfectly cast as the awkward genius Banner, while performance capture tech ensured that his Hulk was a dichotomy of human and beast better than any other iteration. From that jumping off point, we now have a Hulk-Banner hybrid with the smarts of the former and the career strength of the latter. Number 7. Juggernaut, Ryan Reynolds, Deadpool 2. Legendary X-Men villain Juggernaut first appeared on the big screen in Brett Ratner's doomed X-Men The Last Stand, with Vinnie Jones at the helm, and going down in history with that one-liner. It was enough to kill the character, but ears were perked again when it was announced that Josh Hellman was set to play a younger version of the character in Days of Future Past. However, Juggy was eventually jettisoned from the script and his role was filled by Quicksilver instead, but luckily for Hellman, he ended up being cast as the young William Stryker. The third and surely definitive screen version of Juggernaut came in Deadpool 2, where the character made a surprise appearance in the middle of the movie as an inmate imprisoned in the icebox. At first, it was strange to see him fully CGI, but then again, with his sheer size, it would have almost been impossible to present him in any other way. Plus, it turns out that Ryan Reynolds actually voices this big behemoth. He's hilarious, vulgar, and brutishly sized, and landed with the audiences in a way that this character should have from the off. It is easily the best version of Juggernaut to date. Number 6. Blofeld. Donald Pleasance, You Only Live Twice. Ernst Stavro Blofeld is unquestionably the most iconic James Bond villain ever. Well, excluding Jaws and Odd Job and... well, look, he's still brilliant, alright, and I learned a lot about Handle a Pussy from watching this guy stroke his. Let me just ask your mum. Now, many of you might argue that we should be putting Christopher Waltz in this slot because of his turn as Blofeld in Spectre, but honestly, you can't beat Donald Pleasance for finding a balance between cartoon silliness and downright evil megalomaniac. Blofeld's first 2 appearances in From Russia with Love and Thunderball were actually shared between 2 actors, with Anthony Dawson cameoing as Blofeld's hands and head, and Eric Pohlman providing the voice. Therefore, technically, Pleasance is the 3rd iteration and is therefore eligible for this list. Appearing in full in You Only Live Twice, his 3rd act performance of the film is an uproarious delight, thoroughly living up to those prior teasers. Unfortunately, several of his successors either went full ham or were too restrained, therefore Pleasance hit the perfect middle ground. Number 5. Kitty Pryde, Ellen Page. X-Men The Last Stand. You might not even know it, but Kitty Pryde, aka Shadowcat, has indeed been played by 3 actresses throughout the X-Men franchise. In the very first X-Men film, she was a cameo character seen phasing through the wall of Professor X's office. Then, in X2, Kitty again appeared in cameo form while being played by Katie Stewart, who phased through her bed, soldiers, and walls during Stryker's raid on the X-Mansion. Kitty finally got a proper role in The Last Stand, with rising star Ellen Page finally giving a voice to her, as well as some much-needed claws. Although she was dogged by an awful script, it wasn't the last that we'd see of Page as Kitty, as she also played a pivotal role in Days of Future Past, using her abilities to send Wolverine's consciousness back to 1973. Now true, in the comics it should have been her to go into the lead role, but she still managed to do a lot with her limited screen time. Number 4. Lois Lane. Amy Adams, Man of Steel. In terms of cinematic Lois Lane's, Margot Kidder's original is always going to be a fan favourite. She not only was the first on the scene, but gave a wonderfully spunky performance opposite Christopher Reeve's Superman. However, the sequels made her to be, well, a bit of a dolt, to be honest, and even had the gall to give her amnesia just for the fun of it. Kate Bosworth tried her best in 2006's Superman Returns, but was, much like the film itself, nearly completely forgettable, playing things way too passively for the likes of Lois, which is exactly the opposite to the brilliant Amy Adams, who was easily some of the best casting in the DCEU. Though Lois was unfortunately sidelined in Batman vs Superman and Justice League after enjoying a more substantial role in Man of Steel, Adams was, on paper, the ultimate casting choice for Lois. Yes, even more so than Kidder. Number 3. Colossus. Stefan Kapicic. Much like Kitty Pryde, Colossus has actually made several cameo appearances in X-Men movies before finally getting his legitimate coming-out party. The character had a blink-and-you'll-miss-it part in the first X-Men film, played by Donald McKinnon, where he could be seen sketching a drawing at the X-Mansion. In X2, the metallic superhero had a more memorable role, this time played by Daniel Cudmore, where he helped several students escape during Stryker's X-Mansion assault. Cudmore returned for roles in both The Last Stand and Days of Future Past, though given how beloved his character was amongst his fans, his parts did prove to be scant and forgettable. However, Colossus finally got his due in Deadpool, where he was brilliantly voiced by the Serbian actor Stefan Kapicic. And it's he, and the animation team obviously, that truly bring this character to life. His earnest portrayal makes Colossus feel less like a cameo prop and more like an actual character with, feelings and thoughts. Plus, he proved to be the perfect straight man to Deadpool's wackiness. Number 2. Spider-Man, Tom Holland. Captain America: Civil War. Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man is without a doubt one of the icons of the earlier big-budget superhero cinema, an endearingly optimistic and hopeful rendition of a legendary comic book character, and it feels almost like it's sacrilege to say that he's not as good as Tom Holland. I'm not even going to talk about Spider-Man 3 because we all knew who Spidey was by then, and Spidey at that time was Maguire. It did mean that Andrew Garfield's rendition fell quite short as a result, and while he did offer his own spin on the Spidey, his age and overall reliance on snark seemed to stand out more than anything else. When the MCU finally decided to introduce the character in Captain America: The Civil War, they opted to spring for a more realistic and age-appropriate Peter Parker, and boom, that's how we got the brilliant Tom Holland. Holland immediately won the hearts of the MCU fans with his charming, awkward performance as both Peter and Spider-Man. In his subsequent appearances, he's brought an unexpectedly palpable emotion and vulnerability to the character far in excess of either Maguire or Garfield's outings. And so, to many fans, he's absolutely the definitive on-screen portrayal of the character. Now we just have to keep our fingers crossed that Disney and Sony will somehow work out their profit-sharing dispute so Holland can finally get back to the MCU as soon as possible. And number 1, Ann Darrow, Naomi Watts, King Kong. Ann Darrow is, of course, the human protagonist of the King Kong movies, a beautiful actress who tames the titular beast, as was originally played by Fay Wray in the classic 1933 movie. The 1976 remake technically doesn't feature the Darrow character, though Jessica Lange's Dwan, and that's not a typo by the way, is in every way the same character. She's an attractive blonde actress who Kong falls for, and so for all intents and purposes, they're pretty much one and the same. Anne returned in her proper name for Peter Jackson's lavish 2005 remake, with Naomi Watts cast to play the part. And thanks to Jackson's extreme focus on the subject material and eye for casting, Anne felt like more of a fleshed out character than she ever did in the 1933 or 1976 movies, making her the best possible iteration of the character that's ever been. And there we go, those were 10 movie characters who were perfectly cast the third time around. I hope that you enjoyed that, my friends, and I hope that whatever you're getting up to today, you go out there and absolutely smash it. I hope you have a brilliant day, weekend, year, month, whatever. Just go out there and have a good old time. But before you go out there, I just want to say one thing. We spoke today about different iterations of people and being the best version that you can possibly be. And you know what? Sometimes that takes a lot of work. Be fair to yourself, be kind to yourself, because you deserve to do that. If you feel like you're not achieving stuff that you should be, then remember, that's perfectly okay. You don't have to push yourself to the limit each and every day. It is okay to take a step back, to assess situations and find out what you can and can't control. Even getting that slight perspective might help you unlock different ideas, different creative outlets, hell, even things within you that you didn't even know you had. As always, I've been Jules. You can go follow me at RetroJ with a 0 over on Twitter. You have been awesome. Never forget that, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.